name is Katya Filmus and I'm a glass artist and sculptor. I'm originally from Israel. I'm now a tenant here at the National Glass Centre. The Staghead Commission came to us through Glenfiddich, the whiskey company. They were looking for someone who will cast the Staghead, which is essentially a three-dimensional version of the logo. The whole project is a whiskey display unit, and at the top there is this fantastic staghead made of glass. Glenfiddich essentially found Windsor Sculpture Workshop, which is a sculpture workshop based in London. They made the model and they made the mother mold, and from that point we took over. So what I got was a fantastic, brilliant silicone rubber mold. First decision I made was to divide the stag and to cast the antlers separately to the body for various reasons, and obviously I think it was a very good decision. The way we cast the wax is I use a 20-litre wax melting pot, so I have 2 of those. I fill in the mold, and essentially it works just like slip casting. So I fill the mold up with wax, and then I wait about 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes, depends on the thickness that I want or the type of wax that I'm using. And then I drain all the wax out. So essentially what happens is that the longer I leave the wax in the mold before I pour the excess out, I normally wait about 20 minutes to get about 2 centimeters thick wax cast. After about 2 or 3 hours, after I pour the excess wax out, and then I wait about 2, 3, 4 hours. Sometimes I just wait till the next day. Once the wax is out of the mold, I clean the seam line and I make sure the surface is nice and smooth. And then I normally take copper wire or any type of metal wire, and I stick it into the high parts of the model, so wherever there might be air trapped, there will be a hole to allow air to flow. In the stag itself, I have probably about five copper wires that I put mostly in the ears and in the antlers. The reason I use copper wire is I know that many glass artists use wooden skewers. The reason I use copper wire is so when I come to put the chicken wire, I can easily remove those, put the chicken wire, and then put those back on. Just before I start working on the refractory mold, I take the wax, because I normally use turpentine to smooth the surface of the wax, so the plaster doesn't stick, it just runs off the model. What I normally do is take a hairspray and spray the whole wax model with hairspray, let it dry for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I can start making the face coat, and then I start making the refractory mold. The refractory mold is the mold that actually essentially goes into the kiln. It's called refractory because it's designed to sustain extreme heat through a prolonged period of time. The way I make it is just build it layer by layer, and each layer introduce some other reinforcement material that will make the mold as hard as I can make it on the one hand. On the other hand, I want it to be relatively light. Since we're talking about a very, very big project, I'm trying to put as many refractory materials into the mix, so I can essentially end up with a mold which is about not thicker than 15 centimeters all the way around. The mix I use plaster and silica. I normally use more silica than plaster, so for about 1 bag of 25 silica I would use about 21 kilos of plaster, and that is because I want the mold to be quite soft, and I want it to give, because there's a big undercut in the model itself, and I want the mold to be able to shrink with the glass and to move with the glass. So I start with the first layer. The first layer is what we call the face coat, and this layer is quite diluted, so it's designed to pick all the details of the wax. Once I'm done with the first layer, I just carry on a layer after layer. So the second layer will probably be a bit thicker. The third layer, I will start introducing fiberglass. This is again to enforce the mold. And probably fourth, fifth layer again with fiberglass. And once I have a substantial thickness, then I take chicken wire and I wrap the whole thing in chicken wire. The chicken wire really holds everything together. So because the firing is quite long and the peak temperature, which is about 820, I soak at 820 for about 13 hours. I need to enforce it really, really well, and the chicken wire essentially holds the whole mold together. So I put one layer of chicken wire, and then on top of the chicken wire, I go with another layer of plaster and silica. This is when I start to introduce grog as well into the mix, and the grog again enforces it. So I go through 3 different layers of chicken wire. Once this is done, we take the mold, we transfer it to a steaming area, and this is where we take essentially steamers and we steam out the wax. This process takes about 45 minutes. So I normally put 2 steamers, 2 hoses, and just wait until all the wax is drained out from the mold. Once this is done, we flip the mold upside down, and we let it dry. We let it air dry for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, as long as we can. So this is just the head. The antlers are made separately, as I mentioned, and the antlers go through exactly the same process. The next stage is taking it to the kiln. Load the mold with glass. So I put about 20-25 kilos of glass into the mold, whatever I can get into the cavity of the mold, and then the rest of the glass, which is another 25 kilos, because the whole object weighs 50 kilos, I load into a flower pot. So I take a very, very big flower pot. I enlarge the hole that they normally have at the bottom, and put the rest of the glass into the flower pot, and all of this goes into the kiln. The firing in total takes takes 41 days. It takes about 2 days or 2.5 days to reach the peak temperature, which, as I mentioned, is 825. And it soaks at that temperature for 12 hours, 13 hours, and then it starts cooling down. It cools down fairly quickly to 700 degrees, and then from 700 degrees to room temperature, it takes about 38 days. This is when this is the annealing process of glass, so we're trying to even out the temperature throughout the piece, so the piece will not get thermal shock. 41 sleepless nights. We opened the kiln, and up until now they all came out perfectly. Once this is done, as I said, the antlers go through the same process again. They all come out of the kiln. The antlers obviously are fired for a much shorter period of time, so it takes about a week to fire the antlers. Once this is all done, I demold the object carefully. So if there's any flushing, and there normally is a bit of flushing, I won't damage the object itself. The first thing I do once I've finished demolding and cleaning the stag is to take a marker pen or Indian ink and to paint the stag all over. So when I start grinding it, I will know which part of the stag have already been ground. The stag itself takes about 4 to 5 days to grind. So with 60 grit, which is quite rough, and that's to take most of the rough surface, and then I go 60, 80, 120, 220, 400. The final stage of the grinding is 400, which is quite smooth. The antlers go through the same process. We remove the reservoirs with a hand saw, and once Matt finishes to remove the reservoirs, we hand lap it just to get it nice and even. There's a funny measurement between the flat surface of the stag to the floor. It all has to be very precise and leveled, because the whole sculpture goes on top of a specific fixture that Glenfiddich has made. So it all has to be very, very flat, and we hand lap it. We just take a huge sheet of glass, drop a bit of grit, silicon carbide, and we hand lap it. It doesn't take as long as one might imagine, because the piece is quite heavy, so it almost grinds itself down. So it takes about half an hour, 45 minutes, and we go 60 grit, and then quite quickly we move to finer grit and take it up to 220. It goes to be acid polished. So the acid polishers have a big bath which is filled with hydrofluoric acid. They preheat the stag overnight in a bath of water, because the acid itself is quite warm. So to even up the temperature, they preheat it gradually overnight to about 65 degrees, and then the next day they take the stag and they move it straight from the bath, the water bath, into the acid. They leave it for about 20 minutes in the acid bath. They rub it all over the stag, and miraculously the stag comes out completely shiny. The antlers go through the same process again. So once we get the stag and the antlers back to the glass center, the first thing we do is to put it into a sandblasting chamber and sandblast the plaque that has my signature, the sculptor's signature, the National Glass Centre and the University of Sunderland logo, and of course Glenfiddich. They're all numbered, so each one of them has a number, and we UV bond the antlers. So this is essentially the last stage of the whole process. We just make sure that the place of contact between the antlers and the stag is completely leveled, completely flat. We clean it all up nice and tidy, and we use a thick UV glue to glue the antlers.